There is something that happens to almost every American who visits Moscow for the first time. It happens within the first hour, sometimes within the first 10 minutes. They are standing somewhere completely ordinary, a metro station, a shop, a street corner, and they look around at the people around them and they feel something that they cannot immediately name. Something that registers as wrong without being obviously wrong. Something that makes them slightly uncomfortable in a way that they cannot explain to themselves or to anyone else. It takes them a moment to identify what it is, and when they identify it, the feeling gets stronger rather than weaker because what they have noticed is an absence. Nobody is smiling. Not the woman at the ticket window who has been selling tickets for 6 hours and will sell tickets for 2 more hours before her shift ends. Not the man on the bench reading a newspaper who has been coming to this station every morning for 20 years and has never once felt the need to smile at the strangers passing by him. Not the teenagers walking together who are talking and laughing between themselves, but whose faces close the moment they turn toward the public space around them. Not the elderly couple who have been married for 40 years and who hold hands on the platform, but who present to the world around them the same neutral expression that this city has always presented to the world. Nobody is smiling. And in America, this is not normal. In America, the absence of smiling in a public space is a signal. It means something is wrong. It means someone is angry or sad or threatening or at minimum deeply antisocial in a way that other people should be aware of and cautious about. The American brain is calibrated to read the neutral face as a problem face, as a face that is withholding something. As a face that should be smiled at in order to produce a smile in return, because that is how American public life works. You smile. They smile back. The shared space becomes warmer. Everyone is more comfortable. The system functions. Except in Moscow, the system does not function that way. The American who smiles at a stranger in Moscow does not receive a smile in return. They receive nothing. They receive the same neutral expression that everyone else receives, and they go home and they tell people that Russians are unfriendly, that Moscow is cold, that the people there do not smile, and that this means something negative about who they are as people and as a culture. They are wrong. They are so completely and so fundamentally wrong that the truth is almost the exact opposite of what they concluded. What they saw in Moscow was not unfriendliness. It was not coldness, it was not hostility or indifference or any of the things that the absence of smiling signals in American culture. It was something that has a completely different meaning in Russian culture than it has in American culture. And understanding that difference is one of the most important things you can do if you want to understand Russia. Or honestly, if you want to understand America. Because this story is not only about why Russians do not smile, it is about why Americans do. And what that difference reveals about two cultures that have been looking at each other across a vast misunderstanding for longer than either of them fully realizes. Stay with me until the end. Because the last thing I am going to tell you is something that changed how I think about my own country. And I think it might do the same for you. To understand why Russians do not smile at strangers, you need to understand something fundamental about how Russian culture divides the social world. In Russian culture, there is a distinction between two categories of people that is so basic and so deeply embedded in the way people think and feel and behave that most Russians do not consciously think about it at all. They simply live by it the way you live by the rules of grammar without thinking about the rules of grammar. The distinction is between svoi and chuzhoi. Svoi means roughly your own people, your inner circle, the people who are genuinely close to you. Family, close friends, people who have earned a place in your trust through time and shared experience and demonstrated loyalty over years. People who have shown you who they are when things were difficult and have not disappointed you. People who know your real face and not just the face you show to the world. Chuzhoi means roughly outsiders, strangers, people who are not yet part of your circle. People who have not yet earned the kind of trust that membership in the inner circle requires. People who may become svoi eventually if they prove themselves over time, or who may remain chuzhoi forever if they do not. This distinction sounds simple when you describe it. It is not simple in its implications. It is the organizing principle of Russian social life. and it explains almost everything that confuses foreigners about how Russians behave in public and in private. In Russian culture, you behave completely differently depending on which category the person you are dealing with falls into. With svoi, with your own people, with the people who have earned their place in your inner circle, you are warm in a way that has no ceiling. You give everything: your time, your food, your money if they need it, your honesty even when your honesty is not what they want to hear, your presence in moments of difficulty, your loyalty in moments of conflict. The warmth that Russians give to their inner circle is so complete and so unconditional and so different from the neutral face they present to the world, that people who have experienced both find it almost impossible to reconcile the two into a single picture of the same culture. With chuzhoi, with strangers, with people who have not yet earned a place in your circle, you are neutral. Not hostile, not rude, not dismissive, neutral. You do not impose on them. You do not perform emotions you do not feel. You move through the shared public space of the city with the efficiency and the self-containment of someone who understands that the stranger next to them has not given them any reason to open themselves up. This is not coldness. This is a very specific form of respect. A respect for the reality that strangers are strangers and that pretending otherwise is a small dishonesty that Russian culture finds not just unnecessary, but actually slightly absurd. The smile that Russians withhold from strangers is not a smile that has been suppressed or hidden or forbidden. It is a smile that has not been earned yet, and that distinction matters more than most people who write about this subject ever acknowledge. In American culture, the social world is organized on a completely different principle. There is not the same sharp distinction between insider and outsider that Russian culture draws. American culture operates on a principle of default openness. The starting position in an interaction with a stranger is not neutrality. It is warmth, or at least the performance of warmth, which in American culture has become so habitual and so universal that the distinction between genuine warmth and the performance of warmth has largely collapsed. The smile that Americans give to strangers is not necessarily an expression of genuine feeling toward that specific person. It is a social lubricant, a signal that communicates I am not a threat. I am friendly. I am open to interaction if you want interaction. It is a way of making shared public space more comfortable for everyone by contributing a certain amount of performed positivity to the emotional environment of the space. This system works. It makes American public life feel pleasant and easy and accessible in ways that people from other cultures genuinely appreciate when they encounter it for the first time. Strangers feel less strange. Public space feels less threatening. The friction of being among people you do not know is reduced by the constant low-level warmth that everyone is contributing to the shared environment. But this system also has a cost that Americans rarely examine because they have never been outside the system long enough to see it from the outside. The cost is that the smile becomes meaningless. When everyone smiles at everyone all the time, the smile carries no information. It does not tell you anything specific about the person who is smiling at you. It does not indicate genuine warmth toward you specifically, or genuine interest in you specifically, or genuine anything that is specific to you as opposed to the 50 other people that person smiled at today. It is simply what people do. The background radiation of American social interaction, present everywhere and meaning almost nothing anywhere because meaning requires specificity and specificity requires discrimination. And discrimination requires the willingness to not smile at some people, which American culture is not willing to do. Russians who visit America and encounter this constant smiling for the first time have a very specific reaction that goes through several stages. The first stage is pleasure. This is nice. People are friendly here. The second stage is confusion. Why is everyone smiling at me? Do they know me? Do they want something from me? The third stage is a slowly growing suspicion that something is off, that the smiling is not connected to anything real, that it is a performance with no content behind it. And eventually, many Russians who spend enough time in America arrive at a conclusion that genuinely surprises Americans when they hear it. The conclusion is that American smiling feels fake, not because Americans are fake people, but because a smile that is given to everyone equally cannot carry the same weight as a smile that is given specifically to you after you have done something that genuinely warranted it. The Russian smile is reserved. It is rationed. It is given only when something genuinely warrants it. And therefore, when it arrives, it means something real in a way that the American smile cannot mean something real. The history of the Russian unsmiling face goes deeper than culture. It goes into history. And the history is not comfortable, but it is necessary to understand if you want to understand where this comes from at its deepest roots. Russia has a long history of surveillance, of a state that watched what people did and said and expressed in public, and that drew conclusions from those expressions, and acted on those conclusions in ways that affected people's lives in serious ways. The Soviet period institutionalized this surveillance in ways that shaped behavior at the deepest level of culture. For generations, Russians lived in a system where what you showed in public had consequences, where an expression at the wrong moment, a reaction that revealed your true feelings about something the state preferred you to have different feelings about, could be noticed by the wrong person and reported, and result in things that you did not want to result. The neutral face, the expressionless public mask that foreigners read as coldness, was not only a cultural preference in the Soviet period. It was a survival strategy. If your face showed nothing, if your expressions revealed nothing about your inner life, you gave nothing away. You were safe in a way that expressive people were not safe. You could not be read. You could not be reported. You could not be accused of feeling something you were not supposed to feel because your face had given no evidence of feeling anything at all. This history is not ancient. It is within living memory. The grandparents and great-grandparents of people walking on these streets right now lived through it. They developed habits in response to it. They passed those habits on not as lessons or instructions or deliberate teachings, but as simply the way things were done, the way you carry yourself in public, the way you move through shared space, the way you keep your inner life private from the eyes of strangers who might not be only strangers. These habits survived the end of the Soviet Union because habits that are practiced for generations do not disappear when the political system that produced them changes. They persist in the culture long after the original reason for them is gone, because they have become part of the texture of how people exist in the world. The neutral Russian face in public is partly a cultural preference about honesty and authenticity. And it is partly the ghost of a historical reality that shaped everything about how this country relates to public space and public expression. Both layers are real. Both layers matter. And you cannot understand the face without understanding both. There is another layer to this story that almost nobody discusses when they write or talk about Russian unsmilingness, and it is the layer that I find most interesting and most revealing about the deeper values of the culture. It is the layer of honesty. Russian culture has a very specific and very strong relationship with emotional honesty that is different from American culture in ways that run extremely deep. In Russian culture, there is a strong value placed on saying what you mean and feeling what you show and showing what you feel. The idea of performing an emotion that you do not actually feel, of presenting a face to the world that does not correspond to your actual inner state, is something that Russian culture finds not just unnecessary, but actually problematic. There is a Russian concept, difficult to translate precisely, of showing off or pretending, of presenting yourself as more than you are or as feeling more than you feel. That is looked down upon in ways that revealing genuine emotion, even difficult or uncomfortable emotion, never is. Russians who perform happiness they do not feel, who smile at moments when there is nothing in their experience that warrants smiling, who project enthusiasm and warmth and openness that are not grounded in anything genuine, are doing something that the culture reads as a form of deception. Small deception, perhaps. Socially motivated deception. Deception that is intended to make everyone more comfortable, but deception nonetheless. And Russian culture is not comfortable with deception, even when the deception is gentle and well-intentioned. The neutral face of the Russian in public is in this sense the most honest face available. It is a face that says, I am not going to pretend to feel something I do not feel, just to make you more comfortable, or to make this interaction smoother, or to perform a warmth that I do not genuinely have for you right now because I do not know you right now. I am going to show you what is real. And what is real right now is that you are a stranger, and I do not have a specific feeling about you, and I am not going to manufacture one for the sake of social convenience. This is not comfortable from the outside. It is not designed to be comfortable from the outside. It is designed to be true. And Russian culture values truth over comfort in public interactions in a way that American culture, which has made a very different choice, does not fully understand and often reads as its opposite. Now I want to tell you what happens when a Russian smiles at you specifically, what it actually means when it occurs. Because this is the part of the story that most people who discuss Russian unsmilingness never reach, and it is the most important part of the entire story. When a Russian who does not know you smiles at you, it means something specific has happened in the space between you. Something has occurred that has crossed a threshold that the neutral face was maintaining. You said something that was genuinely funny, and the smile is the genuine response to genuine humor that could not be suppressed because it was real. You did something unexpectedly kind, and the smile is the genuine response to genuine kindness that arrived without being performed or expected. You demonstrated something about yourself in this interaction that made the Russian standing in front of you recalibrate their assessment of you from stranger to something that is not yet a name, but that is different from stranger. Something that has potential. Something that could become more if you are both willing to let it. The smile is the signal that the recalibration has occurred. That you have moved, even if only slightly, from chuzhoi towards svoi. From outsider towards someone who might eventually become an insider. This movement is not fast in Russian culture. Russians do not let people into their inner circle quickly or easily. The process requires time and consistency and patience, and the willingness to show up repeatedly and to be real rather than performed. But the smile is the first sign that the process has begun, that the door that appears closed from the outside has a handle that you have just touched. And because it is a genuine sign of something genuine, it carries a weight that the constant American smile cannot carry. When a Russian smiles at you specifically after giving nothing to the 100 strangers who passed before you, you know something real just happened. You know that you registered as a real person to this other real person in a way that produced an authentic response. And that experience is qualitatively different from being smiled at by someone who smiles at everyone. It is rarer, it is more specific, and it is worth more. The private face is where everything I have been describing comes together into something that I think is ultimately more beautiful than the American alternative, even though it is less immediately comfortable. I have sat at kitchen tables in Moscow with people who on the street that morning gave nothing to anyone they did not know, whose faces on the metro were as neutral and as closed as every other face on the metro, whose public presence gave no indication of what was behind it. And around those kitchen tables, those same people were transformed. They laughed with their whole bodies. They told stories that went on for an hour with digressions and tangents and returns and callbacks. They were generous with their food and their drink and their time in ways that felt almost aggressive in their insistence. They were honest about things that most people in most cultures keep private. They were funny in ways that required knowing them to fully appreciate, but that were more genuinely funny for that reason. They were warm in a way that had no ceiling and no performance and no calculation behind it. They were simply there, fully and completely there, with the people they had decided to be there with. And the contrast between the public face and the private face was so complete that it almost seemed like two different people. But it was not two different people. It was the same person operating in two different contexts according to a system that keeps those contexts completely separate because keeping them separate is what makes the private context what it is. The warmth of the Russian kitchen is possible because the neutral face of the Russian street protects it. If the warmth were given to everyone, it would not be warmth. It would be its performance. And performances are what Russian culture is most deeply suspicious of. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep seeing Moscow from the inside. Every week I show you something about this city that you will not find in any guidebook or any news report or any political speech. Come back next week and leave me a comment below. Does your culture smile at strangers? And what do you think that smile actually means when you look at it honestly? I read every comment and I answer as many as I can.